Welcome to my session. Today I will continue with the chapter The Last Lesson, which is in the Flamingo book. I have done the part 1 few days back. Students, please see and go through that chapter, and then you will understand this part also. So here we go. Let me give you a little recap of the story. I hope this picture, students, this is of the Eiffel Tower in France. This story is of France only. So the story is in the backdrop of the Franco-Prussian War. Now the Franco-Prussian War was in 1870 to 71, and in that Franco-Prussian War, France was defeated by Bismarck, and here the districts Alsace and Lorraine was to be occupied by Prussia. So this story goes here that as it started, that little Franz, a small boy, is the narrator of the story. The chapter starts that he was very afraid of the scolding of M. Hamel, the French teacher, and he was late for school also because he had not done the homework on participles, and he was running to go to school, but in the middle of his going to his school he thought of bunking his classes and go and enjoy the warm weather on that day. But as he was going to school, he saw that there was a crowd near the bulletin board in the town hall. So students, I have explained everything in the first part. So what is a town hall? And on the bulletin board there used to come all the kinds of bad news of the battles and commands, and all the orders used to be pinned on the bulletin board. So while he was going, the blacksmith watcher also told him not to run because he had lot of time that day for the school. So little Franz, he thought that watcher was making fun of him because he was already late to school. So he then ran to school, and he found that the school was pin drop silence, unlike the other days. That is, that day the school looked like a Sunday school. When Sunday, what, the students don't go to school and the schools remain closed. Usually from the school, as Franz writes, he says here that he used to find a lot of hustle and bustle in the school, or banging of the desks, the teachers rapping of the ruler. So nothing was heard. It was very quiet. So he very thought that he would get into the class without being noticed. But the French teacher M. Hamel, he tells very in kind words. He tells Franz to sit in the class. Now, when Franz sits in the class, he saw that in the last benches that day, the whole class was full of students, and the last benches were occupied by the village people. The old people were also sitting in the classroom on that day. So he was wondering that what could be the reason. And moreover, he saw M. Hamel wearing his Sunday clothes, best colorful dress, and he thought that what could be the reason. After this, M. Hamel stood and then he told that that was the last lesson of their, because from the next day, in that class, French would not be taught anymore, but German would be taught, because the order from Berlin had come that from the next day German language would be taught. So this last lesson was of the French class. Now this last lesson gives a lot of message also, that here it is a really very sad when people's language, own native language, own mother tongue is taken away from them. So this story, as it says, that the French language was to be taken. So the author mentions that as long as people know their language very well, that would be only the best way to make themselves free from any kind of domination. So here the last lesson, another message here the author gives us, that it's the nature of students to keep delaying to learn something until and unless the last day comes, the last lesson comes of learning. So it to not to regret about things, the children, the students should learn every day and know their language very well. So till there I had done in the first part. Now here we start with the with page 5 I start, and you follow from in your book also. If you have the book, you can follow. It was because they were sorry too that they had not gone to school more. Now here, who are they here? Now, who are they? Now, it was because they were sorry. Now, this they is actually the village people who all, the elders who all were sitting, the old people who all were old villagers, the mayor, old hosser, they were all sitting in the back benches. They were also feeling sorry. They were very sorry too that they had not gone to school more, that they were thinking that they did not attend school. It was their way of thanking our master. So this is narrated by Franz. He says it was there, that is, it was the way of the old villagers to thank the master. Who is master? Master is M. Hamel. Okay. Now M. Hamel, for his 40 years of faithful service. So it was their way of to show their gratitude, to show their respect to the teacher M. Hamel, who was teaching in that school for 40 years, of his dedicated, very faithful service for the students, and of showing their respect for the country that was theirs no more. And why had they come? They had come to sit there in the class in the last lesson to show their respect, their gratitude towards their full respect, their regard for the country, and of course the language French, which was theirs no more. Now students, I hope you are following when it says theirs no more. Why? Because the Prussia had taken over. Prussia what? Defeated France. And Alsace and Lorraine were to be taken or occupied by Prussia. And from the next day, in the school, the German language would be taught. I hope you are following. Please write if you don't understand in the comment box. I will again explain it. So while I was thinking of all this, so who is it? It is little Franz is thinking. He says that while I, now who is this I? This I is Franz. All right, the little boy. Who is Franz? He is the narrator of the story. Okay. He was thinking of all this. He was thinking, sitting there, why that day was so unusual. I heard my name called. So what did he hear? He heard his name called. It was my turn to recite. Recite means something to speak loudly. So the teacher must have asked about the lesson. What would I not have given to be able to say that dreadful rule for the participle? So he said that he was very much wanting to say correctly all the rules of the participle, which the teacher M. Hamel had asked the students to learn all through, very loud and clear, without one mistake, that he was trying his best to tell the rules of participle. So students, you have done participles in your English language grammar. You do same in French language also. There must be the participle chapter in grammar. But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there, holding on to my desk, my heart beating and not daring to look up. So little Franz, what happens? He could not say a word, first word only he mixed up, and his heart was beating and he was unable to face his teacher. He was so ashamed that he did not know the lesson. As Franz did not know the lesson, he got confused and therefore he stood quietly. And it's a very common action of the students. No, when students don't know the answer, they keep on holding onto the desk to get some kind of hold, that because they become very frightened of the teacher that they haven't learned. His heart was beating fast as he was ashamed of himself and did not have the courage to face his teacher. I heard M. Hamel say to me. Now, after this, M. Hamel said to Franz, I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. So, M. Hamel was very kind on that day. The little Franz was very afraid of M. Hamel because M. Hamel was a very strict teacher. But on that day, on that last lesson day, he very kindly told Franz that he should not feel bad enough. See how it is. Every day we have said to ourselves, bah, I have plenty of time. I'll learn it tomorrow. And now you see where we come out. So M. Hamel says that Franz should not feel bad because it is all the students think that every day we have said to, everyone thinks that we keep on delaying, no, we keep on procrastinating. That is, we have plenty of time and I will study tomorrow. It is a nature of the everyone that to delay the matter and learn it tomorrow. And now what happens until the last lesson comes, until the last day comes, when you see that you haven't done a lot. So this is a very great message given by this chapter by the author, that we should not procrastinate. Procrastinate means what? Procrastinate. That is to delay matters. Suppose you have to study today, you have to do your physics lesson today, do it itself today itself, not keep it for tomorrow. Until tomorrow it becomes the last day before the exam. So this is a very great message given by the author. That's the great trouble with Alsace. So this is one of the territories of France. Alsace and Lorraine, these two districts were to be occupied by Prussia. So that's the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning till tomorrow. Now she puts means the she is told about Alsace. Now she means the people of Alsace. That is the whole town, the whole place puts off learning till tomorrow. Now those fellows out there will have the right to say to you. Now who are those fellows? These are the Prussians. So M. Hamel is telling the Prussians will laugh on them, that have right to say, how is it you pretend to be Frenchmen and yet you can neither speak nor write your own language? So the Prussians would laugh on them that you boast yourself to be Frenchmen and you do not know your own language to speak and write your own language. But you are not the worst, poor little Franz. We have all a great deal to reproach ourselves with. So M. Hamel says that little Franz was not the worst of them all, of all the students. They were all great deal to reproach ourselves. That reproach means they all could blame themselves. Reproach means blame themselves with. M. Hamel says, now I have given the explanation here, says that all the people of Alsace were to be blamed as no one was serious towards learning. He tells the class that the enemies, Prussians, would laugh at them and say that they only show to be Frenchmen as they can neither speak nor write their own language. He says that France should not feel guilty as everyone is at fault. That is, everyone was at fault. They all had not neglected in studying French. Your parents were not anxious enough. Now another reason he tells of not learning French, M. Hamel says that your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. That is, the parents were also not very serious for their children to learn the French language. They preferred to put you to work. So in those days, parents were not as serious as the parents are today. They used to send their children to put to work on a farm or at the mills to earn money so as to have a little more money. And and I hear M. Hamill. M. Hamill is telling about himself as a teacher what mistake he had done. M. Hamill, M. and he says, I've been to blame also. He says that he was also to be blamed. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? So M. Hamill admits that he too is guilty, that he too had sent his students to water the flowers, all right, instead of learning your lessons. And when I wanted to go fishing, now the M. Hamill, when he wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? So what were his blames? Number one, he used to make them water the plants, and number two, he used to give them holiday if he wanted to go on fishing. So the story is way back of 1870-71. So in that those times, the students and the teachers, they were not as serious as we are in this modern age when everything is progressing and developing so much. Then from one thing to another, M. Hamill went on to talk of the French language. So M. Hamill went on talking about the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world. So M. Hamill said that it was the most beautiful language, French language, in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must guard. That is, he says that they should all guard means protect it among, or keep it very important for among us, among all the people, and never forget it. Because when a people are enslaved, that is, when a people means when the people of the whole country, they are enslaved. Enslaved means gulami. In Hindi, what do you say? Gulami. As long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. So as long as they hold fast means as long as they know their own language, it would be a key to their key. Prison means key to their freedom. In India also, students, when the independence movement was going on, the whole India, they used to unite. The people, the Indians used to unite, and they had their own language. They could communicate, and they protested. They fought against to drive away the Britishers from India. So here the explanation is given. The individuality isn't taken into consideration when M. Hamill is displaced. He is just another agent of French language that must be replaced with one of the German language. So in wartime, what happens? No one sees to the humanity side. Anything has to be replaced. German language has to be replaced. German language has to take over French language, and they do not think about the teacher, the person, that he will also lose his position as a teacher, who was a very old teacher. This is what war effectively does to people. Wars do not recognize the humanity of the individual, whether it is a soldier in the battlefield or in the teacher in the classroom. Then what did M. Hamill do? He opened a grammar. Who is this? M. Hamill, the teacher. He opened a grammar and read us our lessons. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. Now, little Franz, this is who? Franz. Franz was very surprised, was very amazed to see that how well he was understanding. Now, students, you all also very well understand then that when you are very attentively listening to something, you understand it very well. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. So whatever he explained, whatever M. Hamill explained, it all seemed so easy for them. I think too that I had never listened so carefully, and that he had never explained everything so much with patience. So Franz was realizing on that day that everything he listened very carefully because it was the last lesson. There was no more days to learn French. From the next day, German language would be taught. And the teacher was also explaining with a lot of patience. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away. Now, whom he is telling as a poor man? That is M. Hamill. That is before going away. Why? Because he had to leave the school, no? From the next day, German language would be taught, and he would have to leave that place where he was staying for 40 years. He was a teacher. Now, in those days, the teachers used to stay in the school itself. Us all he knew before going away and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamill had new copies for us written in a beautiful round hand. So that day means that last lesson day, what had M. Hamill brought? New copies for the students in beautiful round hand. Round hand means a beautiful handwriting and calligraphy. The beautiful drawings or beautiful handwriting in cursive writing he had brought. And what had he written? France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desks. So people were so patriotic, feeling so patriotic on that day that they had put that those beautifully written words France, Alsace on the top of their desks. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. That is, how quiet it was means all were attentive. All the villagers, the students, all were very attentive because it was the last lesson of French. The only sound was the scratching of the pens over the paper. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too. So there was entirely, it was very silent, very quiet. The beetle, now this is the beetle. When a beetle enters the room, what happens? It buzzes, no? It makes a bhan, bhan, bhan sound, no? So the students and all those who were sitting in the class, they were not affected. And the ones, that is the little boys who were tracing their fish hooks, they were drawing. They were doing it so sincerely as if they were also learning French language. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? So on the roof, little Franz comments here that the pigeons also, the entire atmosphere was very gloomy. It was very sad. The pigeons were also very cooing, very soft, very low, in a very soft sound they were taking out. And Franz thought that the Germans, will they make them also make the pigeons coo in German? It wasn't possible, no? They had their originality. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamill sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another. So M. Hamill was so sad to uh, leave his teaching of French language that he was gazing at the classroom as if he would capture everything in his eyes, and because he had to leave from the next day, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little school room. Fancy for 40 years. Fancy means, what is the meaning of fancy? Imagine. That is, he was teaching in that school for 40 years. He had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. That is, he stayed there, and there was the garden for 40 long years. He was staying in that place. Only the desks and benches had worn smooth. Had worn smooth means they had become old. They had deteriorated. The smoothness, they had become with 40 years use. It had become very old and dilapidated. The walnut trees in the garden, now the walnut trees in the garden had grown, were taller because for 40 years he must have planted and grown. And the hop-vine, that is the climbers, that he had planted himself, twined. Twined means what? Curled about the windows of the roof. Now this is what? This is walnut, which you call in Hindi, it is called akhrot. So that is what he's. So please go through every word of the chapter because questions can be asked. What trees were planted in his garden? That is walnut trees. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man, to hear his sister moving about the room above, packing their trunks. So, what was his sister? As I told you, the teachers resided in the school in olden times, and his sister on the upper floor, she was packing the things in the trunks. Trunks are what? Big boxes. In the olden days, it were the big boxes used to be there in which people used to keep the things, for they must leave the country the next day, because they had to leave the country next day. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in history, and then the babies chanted their ba, be, bi, bo, boo. That is the phonetics, the sound ba, be, bi, bo, bu. After the history lesson, the babies chanted, means together they read out, or they spoke. They recited ba, be, bi, bo, boo. That is A, E, I, O, U. Down there at the back of the room, old Hosser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer. So I had told in the part 1 also, primer is an elementary book, the basic book. All right, the starting book, in both hands and spelled the letters with them. So these old villagers were also regretting that they had not learned French. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, and it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted and cried. Now, this old man, this old Hosser, he was trembling, that is, he was shivering with sadness that his country was, his Alsace-Lorraine would be taken by Prussia. That we all wanted to laugh and cry at that old man crying. And how well I remember it was the last lesson. So the little boy, Franz, the narrator, says that it was a very, very significant last lesson of French, because the order from Berlin had come that from the next day German language would be taught. All at once the church clock struck 12. So in this gloomy mood, what happened? The church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus. That is, Angelus is a prayer which is done 3 times a day. So what is Angelus? It is done, it's a prayer done 3 times in a day. That is, it's a prayer. All right. That is early morning, afternoon, and evening. So what the church clock struck 12. It was noon. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians, that is, the Prussians had defeated France and they had overtaken their place. So the trumpets, that is the huge kind of bugles, they were blown by the Prussians returning from drill means exercise. So when the soldiers exercise, they use all these kinds of trumpets to make some announcement or make some kind of special march past. Sounded under our windows. M. Hamel stood up, very pale in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. So little Franz thought that M. Hamel was looking so tall. That is, he was looking so imposing, so genuine on that day. And what did he say? My friend, said he, I. And something choked him. That is, he was full of emotions. That is, he could not even speak any words. And it choked him. He could not go on, that he could not speak. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk. He was so emotional. He could not speak, but he took a piece of chalk, bearing on with all his might. He wrote as large as he could, Vive la France, means long live France. Alright, what did he write? He wrote, Long live France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall. In utter desolation, in utter sadness, he just leaned his head on the wall, and without a word he made a gesture. Gesture means a sign with his hand, just to say that school is dismissed, you may go. That is, he did not want to speak anymore. He was very sad that that last lesson day also ended, and from the next day the German language would be taught. I hope you all have understood. Please ask any doubt if you have in the comment box. I would further explain it. So I would come up with the next lesson of your class 12 book. So please remain updated.